Welcome back. In our last session, we arrived with Jesus in the city of Jerusalem, narrating his triumphant entry into that city. This was followed by a look at the narrative of Jesus' lament, or weeping, over the city of Jerusalem. We then followed Jesus as he entered the Temple Mount and expelled the buyers and sellers there, what is known as the cleansing of the temple, or as I chose to call it, the temple incident. We concluded with the Jewish leaders' question concerning Jesus' authority. In our current session, we will begin to examine the ministry of Jesus in the city of Jerusalem. Following the narrative of the ministry of Jesus in Jerusalem in Mark's Gospel, Luke begins with the parable of the tenants. So we begin our discussion there also. This parable is followed by two questions posed to the listeners. The first concerns the legitimacy of tribute or taxes to Caesar, and the second concerns the Pharisaic notion of the resurrection of the dead. Having launched out on his own, incorporating significant amounts of unique material, Luke, in the Jerusalem ministry narrative, joins again the Markan order and parallels Mark's narrative very closely in the material that we look at in this session. The narrative begins with a parable which uncharacteristically does not contain any introductory indication as to how Luke wants the hearers or the readers to interpret it. He simply begins, "A man planted a vineyard." And then he lent it out to tenants while he went away to another country for a considerable time. Many translations will say that he went to another country. However, the sense of the Greek verb apodomeo is to be away from one's people, and hence to be away from one's home. This could be in a foreign country, but not necessarily. This type of absentee landlordism was common in the first century in Palestine. At a certain time, the absentee landlord would send the tenant farmers on his land to procure the produce of the land that was his. That's precisely the next move in the parable. At the proper moment, denoted by the Greek word kairos, the landlord sends a servant to his tenants with the intention of collecting the landlord's portion of the produce of the land for him. The reaction of the tenants is not at all positive. They beat the servant, and they sent him away. This was clearly an act of dishonor. The tenants are acting in a shameful manner, and as such should be severely punished by the landowner. But that's not the case. The landowner rather sends another servant with the same mission. A similar reaction would be expected from the tenants, and that's exactly what happens. They beat the second servant as they did the first, but this time the action is escalating. They also dishonored him, showing him no respect, treating him shamefully, and sending him away empty-handed. The dishonor of the second servant is equivalent to the dishonor of the master, so that their shameful actions are now increasing. The master needs to react in a decisive way in order to preserve his honor. But the landowner will not come to the tenants. Rather, he sends a third servant. The tenants act no differently. They treat the third servant with their shameful response also. They wound this servant, and they send him away. Their shameful actions are getting totally out of hand. Yet the owner still tries to find a way to get his produce from the tenant farmers. In typical Lucan style, the landowner asks himself, "What shall I do?" And the answer comes to him quickly. "I shall send my beloved son. They will respect him, perhaps." It is to be noted that the owner of the vineyard is not at all certain that the tenants will treat his son any differently than the other servants he sent. He uses the Greek adverb isos, which connotes likely or perhaps, or a wish, let us hope so. The adverb comes from the adjective isos, which means equal. The sense is then that there is a 50-50 chance that the son will be accepted. So what the owner is saying is, I'll send my son. Let's hope they respect him. But from what we've seen, there's no guarantee of that. One further point is to be noted. It's that the adjective used to describe the son, beloved. We've seen this adjective used to describe a son earlier in the gospel, at the baptism. Recall, the voice from heaven declared, "You are my son, my beloved one, in whom I am well pleased." It surely cannot be by chance that the same adjective is used here. The reaction from the tenants is quick. They recognize that the emissary now of the owner is his son, the heir. Their thought is not to send him away empty-handed as they did the previous messengers. No, they will totally destroy him. Let us kill him, they say, and it will rid them of the servants, the owner, and everyone else. The vineyard will then be theirs. This reasoning is quite extraordinary. Kill the son and get possession of the vineyard. It would seem that killing the son may be just what will push the owner to where he needs to react with violence on the tenants to get his honor back. Nolan passes off the question with a simple statement. It's finally beside the point to discuss whether, in the legal and political state of affairs that pertained at the time, there was any likelihood of getting away with any such an act. Nevertheless, the tenants act. They threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. The order is significant. In the world of the day, such execution-style killing could not take place inside the walls of the city. Hence, they threw him out of the city prior to executing the sentence of death. Having completed the parable now, Jesus asked the people who are the hearers a question, which is meant to elicit their interpretation of the parable. What will the owner of the vineyard do to these people? Now, from the point of view of an honor-shame society, the owner has on multiple occasions been shamed by these tenants. The only recourse that he has then, in the minds of the people hearing the parable, is to reclaim his honor. And he does that by coming to the tenants himself and having them and destroying them. That is, having them put to death. And taking the vineyard, which is still rightfully his, and giving it to others. In Luke's version, Jesus answers his own question, which is similar to Mark, yet quite different to Matthew, who has the audience answer the question. The people react to Jesus' answer. Me genoito in Greek, let it not happen, literally. Or more colloquially, God forbid. The people in Luke seem to be somewhat sympathetic to the plight of the tenants. In response to this reaction, Luke has Jesus look directly at the people. The verb emblepo carries the sense of fix one's eyes upon or stare at. Thus, Jesus fixes his eyes on the people. He stares at them and asks another question. What, therefore, is the meaning of this text that stands written? The text that stands written is Psalm 118:22, which Jesus now quotes verbatim. The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, literally the head of the corner. The question is, what is the meaning of cornerstone? Some would say that it's a stone used at the corner of a building to support two adjoining walls. Such stones were essential to maintain the integrity of the structure. This would be the view of such scholars as Clinton Arnold. Others, however, would see it as the keystone or the capstone of an arch, as depicted in this picture. The stone that is placed in the arch last, the central stone upon which the entire structure of the arch will lean. As such, that keystone is the most significant stone in the structure. If it is not a good quality stone, the entire arch will collapse. Now, that notion is continued in the next statement of Jesus, which shows a twofold difficulty involving stones. The first is that one falls from some height and lands on an unyielding stone, which will cause them severe damage. That is, they will be broken to pieces. Anyone who falls on that stone, Jesus says, will be broken to pieces. The second part of the statement implies that the stone may fall, shattering those who may be unlucky enough to stand under it. When the stone falls on anyone, it will crush them. The verb likmao, which is used here, has the sense of crush to powder. This will acquire a metaphorical meaning of scatter, flatten, destroy, or shatter. Jesus' latter statement is very much akin to Sancho's statement to Don Quixote on a stone. He says, whether the stone hits the pitcher or the pitcher hits the stone, it's going to be bad for the pitcher. How then does all this about vineyards, tenants, landowners, and stones fit the situation at hand? In other words, what's the meaning of the parable? Well, the negativity of the Jewish leadership to Jesus is the key to the meaning. The parable concerns a vineyard, which is the traditional symbol for Israel from the time of Isaiah. We see that in Isaiah 5, 1-5. With that, the landowner or the vineyard owner would be God. The tenant farmers would be the Jewish people who were given the land of Israel. The servants dispatched to receive the produce would be the prophets sent throughout the history of Israel, who were mistreated by the people because they did not see them as mediating God's word. Clearly, the Son in the parable would be Jesus himself, the Son of God. Here the parable becomes somewhat prophetic, since the very leaders of the Jews, who are supposed to be the tenant farmers, will soon order that Jesus be taken outside of the vineyard, the city of Jerusalem, and killed. As a result, the vineyard will be taken away from the tenants, the Jews, and given to others, the Gentiles, the infant Christian church. The parable, in essence, has given us a short primer on the history of Israel and on Israel's future. We might be tempted to say, good for them. They deserve what's coming to them. But there's a zinger here also. We now have become the tenants in the parable, in the vineyard. The original tenants did not give the master's portion of the fruit to the master. Now, are we similar? Or will we make the vineyard produce fruit so that we can give the master, God, his portion? If not, we may suffer the same fate as the Jews. The message of the parable must have come through loud and clear to the leaders of the Jews. Jesus tells us that the scribes and the chief priests sought to lay their hands on him at that very hour. The reason given for this reaction is that they perceived that he told this parable against them. But they cannot implement their response because, as we have seen several times above, the people are receiving Jesus' word positively, and to harm or attack him would more than likely incur the wrath of the people whom they feared. Nevertheless, the leaders will not let go of their animosity. They have to catch Jesus openly in some situation that will turn the people against him. Hence, they keep an eye on him, and went so far as to send spies who pretended to be sincere. Again, the Greek is significant on two counts. The word for spy is enkathetos, from the Greek verb enkathemi, meaning to put in secret. Whether they are ones who are hired to lie in wait, hence they are ones who are hired to lie in wait, presumably to trap another. Secondly, the Greek word hypocriminemos describes what the spies are doing. It implies to act a part. In other words, pretend. In a word that is used in the arts to denote acting. These are spies for the leaders who are pretending to be pious, righteous, and sincere, but really they're acting out of other motives. Luke then lists those motives, that they might catch him in something that he said, resulting in their being able to deliver him to the authorities and the jurisdiction of the governor. In this way, they could accomplish their desire to rid themselves of him and at the same time not offend the people. We may expect that these spies will attempt to trip Jesus up by putting to him a no-win situation. And that's precisely what they think they're doing when they ask their questions concerning taxes and resurrection. But as we shall see, as the narrative plays out, Jesus will not be caught by the clever questions of his opponents. Rather, he'll turn the questions back on the questioners, leaving them speechless. So the spies begin their charade. They try to get Jesus on their side through flattery, addressing Jesus as teacher, which is the English translation of the honorific title of the Jews, Rabbi. They continue to butter him up, saying, "We know that you speak and teach rightly," orthos. The adverb derives from an adjective meaning straight. Thus, they're telling Jesus that they're well aware that he speaks on the straight and narrow. This is confirmed by their next statement, that he shows no partiality. In Greek, he does not take to any particular face. He's not swayed by human options, but rather he teaches the way of God. Tein hodon tu theou, ep aletheas, in all sincerity. Recall that consistently during the journey to Jerusalem, Luke noted that Jesus was on the way. Hodos. Way in Luke has the sense of moral conduct, way of acting. Thus, the spies acknowledge that Jesus presents a way that consists in obedience to God's law and living the life of righteousness that God desires. With such a build-up, how could Jesus not answer their question? So they ask, "Is it lawful for us to give taxes to Caesar or not?" According to Fitzmyer, the tax spoken of here is the direct poll tax, levied on the inhabitants of Judea from the time of Pompey. There are three aims behind this question. First, Roman levels of taxation were extremely burdensome. Tax burden, or the total tax burden of a person, could be as high as 40%. Second, there was a natural antipathy to foreign domination. And third, the Jews were convinced that as God's people, their proper natural state was as a free nation subject to God alone. Before narrating Jesus' response, Luke notes that he perceived their craftiness. The Greek panorgia, which is literally a readiness for doing anything. In other words, he sees that they will go to any length to achieve their purpose. Then he responds, "Show me a denarius." This is the Roman denarius, which was worth about a day's wage. He follows his command with a question. Whose likeness and whose inscription is on it? The icon is the image that's stamped on a coin. The inscription is what's written around the coin. The Roman denarius of Jesus' day bore the image of Tiberius and contained the inscription, "Tiberius Caesar Augustus, son of the divine Augustus," in Latin, of course. We see such a Roman denarius here. Both the image and the inscription of the Roman denarius would be abhorrent to a pious Jew, since they violate the second and the first commandments of the Decalogue, respectively. It's not just Roman coins that have images and inscriptions to which the pious Jews would object. Here we see a hoard of Tyrian shekels. Note the many images on the coins. Several scholars see an irony in the fact that Jesus' pious questioners carry and trade with such Roman coins. Then the answer comes, presumably after they had produced the coin. Caesar's. Jesus then cuts to the chase and declares, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." In this statement, Jesus' only statement on the role of church and state, he follows the same line of thought that most of the New Testament writers follow. Bach notes that Jesus' answer implies recognition of the political government's authority. It also seems to recognize God's providence in the midst of that rule, much like Romans 13, 1-7. The opponents pose an either-or question to Jesus, and he chooses to answer it with a both-and answer. It's not God or Caesar. It is rather God and Caesar. As Bach continues, performing our duty toward God and honoring God does not immediately imply that we can refuse the state's right to function. Our duty to God takes place within the context of a political state and civil laws. What Jesus does not address here is the question of what to do when the duty to state is in direct moral conflict with our duty to God. The effect of Jesus' short and to the point statement is to foil the purpose of the opponents in asking their question. They were not able, in the presence of the people, to catch him in what he said. Their attempt to win the people over to their side failed. In fact, it may have actually done the opposite. It may have won the opponents over to Jesus' side, as Luke's final comment implies. But marveling at his answer, they became silent. This unit causes us to reflect on our relationship to the state. Do we resent paying taxes? Or do we realize that they are necessary payment to provide the many services that the state provides for us? Do we feel the state in its legislation is trying to eliminate or curtail our religious practice, limit our religious freedom? From the question of taxes, the text moves to yet another hot topic of discussion, resurrection. Another question is posed to Jesus. This time it comes from the Sadducees. They were the priestly upper class of Jewish society who accepted only the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, what's known as the Torah, and thus did not necessarily believe in the later Pharisaic notion of resurrection. The narrative begins simply announcing the current antagonist. There came some of the Sadducees. Then Luke tells us a little about the Sadducees, those who deny the existence of the resurrection. And then Luke introduces the Sadducees' question to Jesus. The question is really a rather long, involved case, which then leads up to a question. It is a case that dates to Moses. The case is as follows: a principle, an application, and then a question. The principle. If a man's brother dies, having a wife, but no children, the man must take the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. That is concisely what has come to be known as the Levirate Law. Now, with that principle, they provide an application. There were 7 brothers. The first took a wife and died without children. And the second took her according to the Levirate Law. And the third according to the same law. In fact, all 7 took the woman as a wife, and all 7 died childless. Then the woman died. Now the question. In the resurrection, whose wife will the woman be? All 7 had her as a wife. Jesus replies to their question with a rather lengthy answer, which, as we have come to expect from Jesus, does not answer the question directly. He begins, "The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage." The term sons of this age implies the dichotomy between this age, the life that we live here and now, and the age to come, and the life in the world of the resurrection. So presently, children marry sons and are given in marriage daughters. Even though the Greek word used, huioi, is literally translated sons, it is better translated as children. The resurrected life is different, as Jesus continues. Those considered worthy to attain to that age, that is the age to come, and to the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage. The category that governs the Sadducees' question does not apply. 2 points are worth considering here. The notion of worthiness for the age to come implies that there are some who will not qualify for life after the resurrection. Thus, Luke implies that there will be a universal resurrection, which will lead to a universal judgment. Not all will come out well from that judgment. The second point is that marriage, that is, marrying and being given in marriage, are not a part of that world. Marriage in this age was seen as a means for procreating and continuing the human race. In the age to come, people are immortal, and hence there is no need to continue the human race, and so marriage would be unnecessary. Thus, the question of the Sadducees is beside the point. The reason, then, is given for this. They cannot die anymore. In other words, as we said above, they are immortal. This is then rephrased in 2 further ways. They are like unto angels. In Judaism, it was a belief that angels did not have need of food or marriage. Note the introduction of angels here leads the topic into another area that's denied by the Sadducees. Further, they're sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. The resurrected are immortal, living a new and totally different life. Thus, relationships in the resurrected age are different from relationships in the current age. All in heaven is being in the presence of God the Almighty. Relationship with God Almighty is overarching, primary, and key. All other relationships are seen and experienced in relationship to that overarching relationship with God. That's the essence of the life to come. Hence, again, the Sadducees' question fails to recognize the reality of life in heaven. Now, having discounted their question as unrelated, Jesus goes on to show that resurrection is a reality that the Sadducees should believe in by bringing forth support for the notion of resurrection from the Torah, the very scripture that forms the basis of the Sadducean belief. He continues, Moses pointed out that the dead were raised. The citation Jesus gives comes from the passage on the bush. That is Exodus 3, or more precisely, Exodus 3:6 or Exodus 3:15, where God is referred to as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. The Exodus text says, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. It is in the present tense. The implication is that the patriarchs are still living at the time of the burning bush. That is, they are enjoying life after life on earth. Hence, there is life after death, and thus there is a resurrection. This is a graphic depicting Moses and the burning bush, as is found in the great synagogue in Dura Europa. Using the Greek particle de, which implies contrast, Jesus says, in contrast to your thought, he is not a God of the dead, but of the living. This proves the point of the Exodus citation. But then Luke adds yet another reason, for all live to him. Noland paraphrases this as follows: all, no matter whether they have passed beyond death or not, are available to God's future purposes, and so, in that sense, are still living, seeing this phrase as an allusion to 4 Maccabees 7:19, which states, since they believe that they, like our patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, do not die to God, but live in God. The scribes respond to Jesus' discourse positively. Teacher, you have spoken well. This would be expected, since the majority of the scribes belong to the Pharisee party. On the question of resurrection, they would have totally and wholeheartedly agreed with Jesus' interpretation. Jesus' handling of the Sadducees' question has left them speechless, and so they no longer dared to ask him any questions. So the Sadducees are dumbfounded, and the scribes are quite pleased. So, to recap, in this session, we have begun to discuss Jesus' ministry in the city of Jerusalem during the week before he suffered and died. He enters into discussion with various representatives of the various groups that comprise the Jewish leadership. In each case, he shows them that he will not compromise his principles, nor will he allow himself to be caught by their trickery. He begins with a parable on the fate of the vineyard, Israel. This led to a discussion of the legitimacy of taxation and ended with a theological discussion of the notion of resurrection. Next time, we will continue the ministry of Jesus in Jerusalem with a question posed by Jesus on how the Messiah can be both son and Lord of David. Then Jesus will launch into a diatribe against the scribes, which will bring us to the narrative of the widow's mite. This serves as a prelude to the great apocalyptic discourse of Luke. See you then.